Have you ever noticed that the nicest people in the room are often the ones treated with the least amount of respect? We are taught from childhood that kindness is a universal currency, a moral magnet that automatically attracts goodwill and appreciation. But reality operates on a much darker, colder set of rules. In the social hierarchy, uncalculated kindness is not viewed as a virtue. It is viewed as an invitation for exploitation. When you open your doors to everyone without a lock, people do not thank you for your hospitality. They simply walk in, take what they want, and leave their dirt behind. There is a precise, invisible line where genuine kindness transforms into psychological submission. Today, we are exploring the shadow mechanics of human interaction, stripping away the comfort of moral illusions to reveal the three definitive psychological shifts that separate the kind person who commands absolute respect from the kind person who is secretly despised. Section 1. The illusion of compliance, the real origin of your kindness. To understand why your kindness is being weaponized against you, we must first dissect its true origin. Most people who consider themselves pathologically nice believe they are operating from a place of pure, elevated morality. This is the first great cognitive illusion. In the framework of shadow psychology, unconditional compliance is rarely an act of genuine love or altruism. Instead, it is a sophisticated subconscious survival strategy rooted in deep-seated insecurity and the terrifying fear of social abandonment. When you constantly say yes to requests that drain your energy, when you swallow your anger to keep a superficial peace, and when you anticipate the needs of others at the expense of your own well-being, you are not acting out of nobility. You are engaging in a process known in clinical psychology as fawning. Fawning is a psychological trauma response, a defense mechanism designed to disarm potential conflict before it even begins. It is an unconscious transaction, a form of emotional bribery where you offer your absolute submission in exchange for temporary safety and validation. The social architect and psychoanalyst Carl Jung heavily emphasized the danger of suppressing one's capacity for aggression. When you bury your boundaries to remain likable, you create a false persona, a fragile mask of absolute purity, but human nature is deeply perceptive. On an evolutionary level, people do not judge your value based on how helpful you are. They judge it based on the psychological price required to deal with you. Consider the modern workplace or any social circle. There is always the individual who arrives early, stays late, takes on everyone else's unfinished tasks, and never complains. They believe they are building a mountain of goodwill. However, the sociological reality is brutal. Because their compliance is guaranteed, their labor is instantly devalued. In the eyes of the group, this individual has signaling that their time, their energy, and their personal life have a market value of zero. They have systematically trained the environment to treat them as an expandable resource. This behavior triggers a dangerous psychological feedback loop known as the overjustification effect. When a behavior is performed continuously without any resistance or clear boundaries, the observers cease to view it as a generous favor. Instead, they reclassify it within their cognitive framework as an innate obligation. The moment the pathologically nice person finally decides to say no, they are not met with understanding. They are met with intense resentment because they have disrupted a baseline of free, unearned privilege that the group felt entitled to possess. Section 2. The architecture of boundaries, the dynamic filtration system. The first fundamental difference between the respected individual and the exploited individual lies entirely in the structure of their personal boundaries. In the domain of gray psychology, boundaries are not rigid walls of isolation, nor are they wide-open gates of absolute act. A respected person operates their life like a highly sophisticated dynamic filtration system, while the disrespected person possesses no architecture at all. To visualize this concept, we can look at one of the most famous and profound studies in social psychology, the systemic compliance experiments conducted by Robert Cialdini on social architecture and human borders. Cialdini demonstrated that humans instinctively categorize external entities based on the amount of friction required to interact with them. If an entity offers zero friction, the human mind instinctively classifies it as property, not a peer. The individual who is consistently despised or taken for granted lacks a psychological skin. Their boundaries are porous, shifting constantly depending on the emotional temperature of the room or the demands of whoever happens to be standing in front of them at any given moment. They lower their standards to accommodate toxic behavior because they operate under the naive assumption that their patience will eventually inspire the other person to change. This is a catastrophic miscalculation of human psychology. In reality, bad actors do not stop when they encounter a lack of boundaries. They accelerate. When you forgive an insult without demanding a genuine apology, or when you allow someone to repeatedly waste your time without enforcing a consequence, you are not displaying tolerance. You are actively teaching that person exactly how much disrespect you are willing to tolerate. You are providing them with a customized user manual on how to walk all over you. Conversely, the individual who commands respect understands that a boundary is completely meaningless unless it is paired with a clear, enforceable penalty. They establish a transparent psychological perimeter. When a line is crossed, they do not launch into emotional hysterics or passive-aggressive retreats, both of which are signs of underlying weakness. Instead, they execute a calm, cold, and calculated withdrawal of their presence, their attention, or their resources. Think of this contrast through the lens of a historical analogy, the sovereign nation. A nation that possesses a magnificent culture and endless wealth, but has absolutely no border control, no army, and an open policy for any invading force to take its resources will quickly cease to exist. It will be plundered and forgotten. Another nation might be smaller with fewer resources, but it possesses clear, heavily guarded borders and a highly disciplined defense force. Even if it never fires a single weapon, the mere presence of its capacity to defend itself forces every global superpower to negotiate with it through diplomacy and deep respect. The respected person is that well-defended nation. Their kindness is a deliberate, conscious diplomatic gift, extended only to those who have demonstrated a profound respect for their sovereignty. Their boundary is a filter that keeps the toxic parasites out while allowing mutually beneficial relationships to flourish within. Section 3. The economy of value, scarce diamond versus limitless water. The second fundamental divergence between the respected individual and the exploited individual is found in how they manage the economic laws of human psychology. Human desire, respect, and valuation are governed by a universal principle, the law of scarcity. In the marketplace of social interactions, the disrespected person operates on an inflationary model of unlimited supply, while the respected person masterfully controls their availability to maintain a high psychological premium. To understand why this happens, we must examine a profound cognitive bias known in behavioral economics as the scarcity principle, heavily documented in the mid-20th century. Psychologists found that when an object, a resource, or an individual's attention is perceived as highly limited, the human brain automatically assigns a higher aesthetic and functional value to it, completely independent of its objective utility. Conversely, when a resource is abundant and perpetually accessible, its perceived value plummets towards zero. This is the paradox of value, famously illustrated by water and diamonds. Water is absolutely vital for human survival, yet it is so abundant that it costs almost nothing. Diamonds are completely useless for survival, yet their extreme scarcity makes them immensely valuable. The individual who is constantly exploited chooses to act like water. They are perpetually available. Every time their phone rings, they answer on the first second. Every time a casual acquaintance asks for a massive favor, they drop their own life plans to fulfill it. They believe that by being infinitely accessible, they are proving their loyalty and indispensability to the group. However, shadow psychology reveals a much darker consequence. When you are always there, your presence shifts from a valuable gift to a baseline utility. People do not feel grateful for the air they breathe until they start to suffocate. If your kindness requires zero effort, zero sacrifice, and zero qualification from the recipient, it ceases to be a virtue. It becomes a default background setting of their lives. The human brain is an evolutionary machine designed to conserve energy. It will never invest emotional respect into something it already owns completely and unconditionally. The individual who commands respect treats their time and energy like a diamond. They recognize that their life force is a finite, precious asset. They do not distribute their favors blindly. They require a psychological buy-in from the other person. They understand that for a relationship to remain healthy and equitable, there must be a mutual investment of effort. Consider a famous historical case study from ancient political strategy, the rise of Octavian, who later became Emperor Augustus of Rome. Unlike his predecessor Julius Caesar, who gave away his clemency and political favors so freely that his subordinates grew to resent his absolute power, Octavian carefully rationed his accessibility. He made his inner circle earn his trust through rigorous tests of competence and loyalty. He understood that a favor granted too easily devalues the authority of the leader. By creating a controlled environment of selective reward, he ensured that every title, every piece of land, and every gesture of goodwill he bestowed was treated as in priceless honor. His followers did not plot against him. They competed fiercely with one another just to win his approval. When you practice the psychology of scarcity, you are not being cold or manipulative. You are practicing strategic self-preservation. You force the people around you to consciously evaluate whether their request is truly important enough to warrant consuming your limited time. This friction instantly filters out the casual opportunist and leaves you surrounded only by those who genuinely value your presence. Section 4. The strategic negative. The sovereign power of saying no. The third pillar that separates these two archetypes is the ability to wield the strategic negative. Saying no is the ultimate declaration of personal sovereignty. The disrespected person views the word no as a dangerous weapon that will shatter their relationships, while the respected person views it as a necessary tool that defines their identity and preserves their internal peace. In social psychology, there is a well-known phenomenon called the door-in-the-face technique, which demonstrates the intense psychological pressure humans feel to conform and agree. When people are asked to perform an action, they experience a subconscious wave of anxiety if they choose to decline. The pathologically nice person is completely paralyzed by this anxiety. They possess a psychological defect, an inability to tolerate the temporary discomfort of someone else's disappointment. Because they cannot say no, their yes carries absolutely no weight. If a machine is programmed to always turn right, the choice to turn right is completely meaningless. It is not an act of free will. It is a mechanical automation. Similarly, if you say yes to every demand, your compliance is not a reflection of your generosity. It is a reflection of your cowardice. The people around you realize this incredibly quickly. They understand that your agreement is not earned. It is simply extracted through the path of least resistance. The respected individual understands that every time they say yes to something unimportant, they are automatically saying no to their own goals, their own family, and their own mental health. Therefore, they treat no as their default shield. They do not offer long, elaborate justifications or defensive excuses when they decline a request. In the world of communication theory, over-explaining your refusal is a submissive signal. It implies that you need the other person's permission to say no and that you are begging for their forgiveness. A profound demonstration of this can be found in the linguistic studies of high-ranking military commanders and elite corporate executives. These individuals communicate their boundaries using minimal, high-certainty language. When they decline a proposal, they do it clearly, directly, and without emotional baggage. They might say, "I cannot commit to this project at this time," and then they stop talking. They allow the silence to sit in the room. This lack of anxiety forces a profound cognitive shift in the person making the request. They instantly realize they are dealing with an individual of high status, someone who owns themselves completely. A person who can say no calmly and look you in the eye while doing it reveals that they possess an independent source of validation. They do not need your applause to survive, and because they do not need you, you cannot control them. That realization is the exact psychological soil from which true, unshakable respect grows. Section 5. The Paradox of Pacifism. True kindness requires the capacity for aggression. The fourth and perhaps most shocking divergence between the respected individual and the exploited individual lies in their relationship with conflict. The disrespected person confuses pacifism with morality, while the respected person understands that true peace is only possible when you possess the undeniable capacity for war. In shadow psychology, a person who cannot defend themselves is not peaceful. They are simply harmless. To unpack this psychological truth, we must look at a fundamental concept developed by Friedrich Nietzsche and later expanded by Jordan Peterson, the archetype of the disciplined monster. Nietzsche famously argued that true virtue does not exist in the absence of a capacity to do harm. If an animal is weak, slow, and lacks teeth, its choice not to bite is not a moral virtue. It is a biological limitation. It cannot bite even if it wanted to. Therefore, its gentleness is artificial. True morality only exists when an individual is fully capable of ruthlessness, destruction, and intense confrontation, but deliberately chooses to keep that power under absolute, conscious control. The pathologically nice person operates from a position of total toothlessness. They abhor conflict, viewing it as the ultimate social failure. When they are insulted, mocked, or pushed past their limits, their default response is to swallow the humiliation, smile through the pain, and rationalize the abuser's behavior. They say to themselves, maybe they are just having a bad day, or I will be the bigger person. This is a profound cognitive coping mechanism designed to hide their own terror. Because they lack the psychological spine to confront the offender, they rebrand their cowardice as spiritual maturity. But the human subconscious is highly attuned to power dynamics. When a predator encounters a prey animal that refuses to fight back, the predator does not feel touched by the prey's high moral standards. The predator simply eats. The individual who commands respect operates on a completely different psychological blueprint. They are fundamentally kind, polite, and cooperative, but their kindness is backed by an undercurrent of formidable strength. They possess what shadow psychology calls integrated aggression. They have faced their own dark side, acknowledged their capacity for cruelty, and harnessed that energy into an unshakable presence. Consider a famous historical experiment in behavioral psychology known as the iterated prisoner's dilemma, which simulates human cooperation and betrayal over long periods. Computer scientists tested hundreds of different strategies to see which one would achieve the highest level of success and respect from other players. The strategy that consistently destroyed all others was called tit for tat. The rules of tit for tat were incredibly simple. Always start by being completely cooperative and kind. If the opponent betrays you or exploits your kindness, instantly retaliate with equal force in the very next round. No hesitation, no exceptions. The moment the opponent stops attacking and returns to cooperation, immediately forgive them and resume by being kind. This strategy was profoundly successful because it was predictable, fair, and most importantly, dangerous. It communicated a clear message to the environment. I am a loyal friend, but I am a lethal enemy. The respected person embodies the tit-for-tat strategy perfectly. They do not seek out conflict, but they never run away from it. If someone aggressively crosses their boundary or treats them with blatant disrespect, they do not hide behind a fake smile. They look the offender directly in the eyes, speak with absolute clarity, and call out the behavior on the spot. They are willing to break the relationship, walk away from the deal, or accept the temporary chaos of a confrontation to protect their dignity. Because everyone around them knows they possess the teeth to bite, everyone treats them with the utmost care, respect, and consideration. Your transformation from an exploited person to a respected individual does not require you to become cruel, arrogant, or cold. It requires you to awaken from the moral coma of people-pleasing. Kindness and self-preservation are not opposites. They are two sides of the exact same coin. You cannot give genuine light to the world if you allow every passing stranger to steal your oil and smash your lamp. From this moment on, stop using your kindness as a shield to hide your fear of rejection. Start viewing your time, your attention, and your emotional energy as the most exclusive, high-value assets you own. Build your psychological skin, establish your boundaries, enforce your penalties, and never be afraid to let someone experience the cold, empty space left behind when they choose to disrespect your presence. If this psychological breakdown shifted your perspective, drop a comment below with the word sovereignty so I know you made it to the end. Subscribe to Shadow Psychology DD, turn on the notifications, and remember, do not just be a good person. Be a good person who knows how to fight back. See you in the next analysis.